Greetings, strange people who would rather watch me than the fake news. In my last video in this series, Music Scales Revitalized, number 4, I talked about my scale system, how I make scales and how I look at them and how I perceive them. And I thought I was done talking about it, but I wanted to throw in some last minute stuff for those who are really into theory and really look deeply into things, even if those things are not necessarily useful. Some people really like theory, which I do. So please allow me to go into this just a little bit deeper. For my system, I went back to Greece to 330 BCE, right? And I looked at the Greek structure called a tetrachord. I talked about this in my previous videos in this series, okay? You can review that if you want to. I discovered that the Greeks way back then had kind of 3 basic tetrachords: the diatonic, chromatic, and enharmonic. All right? The diatonic basically features whole and half steps in that tetrachord. The chromatic has this 3 half-step interval and then 2 half steps, and those 2 half steps actually are true chromatic. In other words, in the modern chromatic scale, each tone will move up 1 half step. So that's the chromatic element. And here is the enharmonic, all right? And that was a weird tetrachord, which I talked about. You can review that in my other videos. And enharmonic means within the harmonic structure or within the harmony. And this turned out to be not so popular, and they kind of abandoned it. Now, by the Middle Ages, okay, that's roughly 400 to 1550 CE. What they did was they decided that they liked to see the tones in the ascending order, okay? So they kept the ascending order of tones. They liked that better. And they like to work with different combinations of whole and half steps. They preferred that. And of the 3 Greek tetrachords, they basically preferred the diatonic setup or version of half steps. Okay? So we talked about that in the other videos. You can review it if you want to. So what happens is they still had tetrachords from ancient Greece. All right, they preferred the diatonic, as I mentioned. But by the Middle Ages, they'd like the ascending order of tones. All right, the tones go up in pitch as they're notated on the music. So you still have mostly diatonic structures here with whole and half steps. And the chromatic was still there, lingering in the background, but they didn't bother with this too much in the Middle Ages. They didn't care for it. So, in my studies, I went through the Greek theory, the Middle Age theory. I went through traditional up to the present day. I ended up with my scale phrase system. That's in my previous videos. And I showed you different scale phrases. I showed you how they're named and why they're named and the half steps and all that kind of stuff. So you see what happened was, in my system, just like those in the Middle Ages, I liked the whole and half step combinations. Okay, I liked that, so I kept it. Or I kept that just like the Middle Age theorists did. And I also liked the somewhat chromatic element of the Greek tetrachord, the half steps. So what I did was I used whole and half step combinations for some of the scale phrases. Right, that's what mine are called, scale phrases. And I also used combinations of whole, half, and 3 half steps. I used combinations of those. And I also did what I call the odd only setup, where you have odd number of half steps only. Here's 1 half step, and here's 3. So there's no even number of half steps here. So that's what I kept. And once again, you can see that in previous videos. But the reason why I'm making this last minute video for those who are really into theory, because no one else is going to care, is because I focused on my basic scale phrases, the most important ones: major, minor, minor 2, augmented, diminished, harmonic, altered, and blues. Blues isn't used too often. But the point is, I focused on the major basic scale phrases in my system. And in my last video, I did mention that I have what we call unusual scale phrases. Now, this is in my book. All right, these are called unusual, and there are 8 of them. And I mentioned that you'll rarely see these in modern music, and you likely won't use them. And I also mentioned that I don't use them. But for theory and looking deeply into something as far as you can go, which is what I excel at, I actually, in my book and in my videos, I didn't really have the space in my book or the time in my videos to explain that those unusual scale phrases, I actually have given them proper names, but it's not in my book, and I don't talk about it because nobody cares. So anyway, I'm doing this for fun. Now, the unusual scale phrases that I just showed, all right, there are 8 of them. There are 8 of them, and here's the half-step order in each one. You can pause or print screen if you want to really check it out. Now, these unusual ones actually have proper names, and it's not mentioned in my book, but they're kind of nice. And they're kind of sort of related to the basic scale phrases, okay? Like here's your basic scale phrase, a diminished. We talked about that, all right? Now in the unusual pile, the batch, all right, we have the diminished 2, diminished 3. Now here's your basic harmonic, all right, the basic. But then you have your unusual, or I call them variants. You have your harmonic 2 and harmonic 3. And here's your basic altered scale phrase. But here's your 3 variants or variations. The altered 2, altered 3, and reverse altered. And then in that same group of half-step combinations, that same scheme, right, you have the blues, that's your basic, from your basic 8. But then you have in your unusual or variant pile, you have your reverse blues. So you see here, in the first batch, all right, you have, in the scale phrase, you have combinations of whole and half steps, all right, in that group. In the next group, you have combinations of half and 3 half steps, okay, you have that in the second group. I'll hold that up just a little bit so you can see it. And you can see here that here's the proper name, but here's the unusual number in the book. This is unusual number 1, number 5, etc. Now down here in this group, you have combinations of whole, half, and 3 half steps. Right, that's your third scheme. So you have your, basically this group, right? Then here's another group based on the order of half steps. Then you have your third group, which would include the altered and the blues. So you have 3 half-step schemes. Those with combinations of half and whole, those with which have only odd half-step intervals, half and 3 half, and then you have the scheme which has the one of each, half, whole, and 3 half. Okay? And then you have the published name. It's in the book. It's called unusual, etc., right? Here's your half-step order, and here's the actual scale phrase proper name. This is another little list, a little chart. But I think it works out very nicely. It's logical. And even though I don't use these scale phrases, and you probably won't, at least theoretically, it's good to know we went the whole way and we took it to the end, because it's not in my book. Just putting my book together was a nightmare. Now, you can look at it this way. One last thing here. We used to call the 8 basic scale phrases basic, and then we called the weird ones unusual. But you could also refer to the basic as base scale phrases, and then the unusual as variant. So here's how they go together. Here's your basic ones. All right, these 1, 2, 3, 4. These 4 basic scale phrases really don't have any variants, right? But down here you see your diminished, harmonic, altered, and blues have your variant scale phrases. It's just a nice little clean, little neat system that I have. But for those who really care about theory, I did not put that in my book. So, hold on a second. The sad part is AT&T, the phone company, is taking away my service for this little phone that I use. I won't be able to use it for calling anybody, and this phone has served me well. It's made all these goofy videos, and it's been a workhorse. So you see in my system that when you go all the way back to 330 BCE, we still embrace the idea of the Greek diatonic tetrachord. We still kind of keep that. We like it. For the chromatic, we like the half-step movement, half-step. We like that. We kept it. I kept it, right? So then down here, you can see for enharmonic, what I did was I just kept the term harmonic, all right? And I applied it to the 3 half-step interval so that we wouldn't completely trash the chromatic basic germ idea, the seed idea. So we don't completely trash it. We keep it, we employ it. So in my system, I have some of this. I have the essence of some of this. I just took this interval. I took off the prefix. I call it harmonic. So I actually kept a lot of the old stuff, and I think that's it. I know you're tired of hearing this, but theoretically, if you look at it and study the base scale phrases and the variant scale phrases, you'll see how neatly they go together, and that's the end of it. I think in Western music theory, as far as the 4-tone group, I don't think anything more can be said. You can check it out if you want to, but I think that's it. So thanks for being incredibly patient, and I'll try to stop talking about this topic. Good night.